Yeah, so since we started on backgrounds, maybe we can intro ourselves super quickly so people know who the heck we are, why are we here. So you gave mine briefly. I'm a software engineer by background, computer science, math, undergrad, came out to Silicon Valley right after college, 25 years ago now. Began my career at Oracle in the database group, and then moved over to Google in 2003. Spent 9 years there. Worked on a bunch of different things. That was a period of rapid growth at Google, and so I got to work on several exciting projects. The first one was AdWords, then infrastructure, then Gmail and Gmail monetization. Left Google in mid-2012 to join a startup that was acquired by Twitter pretty quickly, and I left before the acquisition and co-founded Signalfire, where we're privileged to be investors in Horizon 3, and that's how I came to know Snehal. We led the seed round I think it closed in January 2020, right before COVID hit. And actually, I think you were the first company that we probably ever invested in where we didn't meet the founder physically, like in 3D, because I think the original meeting was like over Thanksgiving, everybody was traveling, and then COVID hit. And I don't think I met you live for probably another year after we invested, which was highly unusual back then. It's interesting how these things change. It used to be that if you offered a founder a Zoom meeting, that was like offensive. It's like, you're not important enough. I'm not going to prioritize meeting you in person. Now I think it's like people prefer meeting on Zoom because it's much more streamlined. Back then it was highly unusual. But yeah, in a short 5 years, it's been pretty action-packed. We went through COVID, a huge down cycle. There was a market crash, then a bubble that we can now say is a bubble in retrospect in 21, and then a correction in 22, and kind of now we're, I guess, in the new normal. Let's see what happens now. But so that's my background. Do you want to give yours, Snehal?
Yeah, so software engineer by education and trade, started my career at IBM, and then left to be the CIO at GE Capital. So spent time learning how to apply and use technology in financial services, and then moved out west to be the CTO at Splunk, helped scale that company, which is an amazing experience. Now at the end of 2017, I disappeared from the world for about 4 years and joined Special Operations. So I served as the first CTO for Joint Special Operations Command. Hardest, most meaningful work of my career. If you guys ever watched Captain Phillips or Zero Dark 30, JSOC killed Bin Laden and saved Tom Hanks, which was awesome. And I owned everything from drone swarms to self-driving boats to sharks with laser beams and all the other things that special operations operators need from a technology standpoint. And that's where I met my co-founder, Tony. And when he retired from the Air Force and I finished my tour at JSOC, we started Horizon 3 together. A third of my people are former NSA, CIA special operations. 2/3 are nerds and skinny jeans that know how to build, ship, and sell software. And we basically are hackers. And we pioneered this concept of AI hackers, where we had a 9-year-old kid point, click, shoot, and hack a bank in 4 minutes and 12 seconds using our autonomous agents, which were pretty cool. And this is before AI was a thing. It was Horizon3.ai in 2019 because I couldn't afford .com when I started the company. Is kind of my opening.
Yeah,
joke.
we should actually touch on that because I was looking at the list of companies, and I think it's kind of become consensus that AI is going to impact cybersecurity in a major way in all kinds of ways. But back then it wasn't, and we can probably get to that. But to your question about board members, let's face it. Like most founders, fundraising is hard. And so you don't always have your choice of board members. So it's kind of a privileged position to be in, to be able to choose. And, in my experience, what happens with startups, in some ways, the highs of a startup founder are super high and the lows are low, very low. And they often happen, in the same day. It's very condensed. And so I think the important thing is, as a board member to kind of try to bring people to the middle, kind of keep an even keel. Don't get too high when things are going great, and let's not get too low and down ourselves when things are looking pretty dark. And I think that's been kind of the kinds of boards that I see function very well are kind of in that mode where, sometimes you'll see, a company closes a big deal and somebody will say, oh, wow, let's hire a bunch of AEs, let's go. We have it, we found product market fit. And then 3 quarters later, you find out that not so much. You just burned a bunch of money. And likewise, you have a poor quarter and people freak out. And having been at fast-growing young companies on the inside, it's never as bad as it seems or never as good as it seems. The answer is always somewhere the reality is always somewhere in the middle. And, that's what I try to bring to the boards that I'm on. And that's what I have found to be the most effective boards as a group that I've been privileged to be on. And I think we have a good mix from that perspective of folks with different backgrounds. And so, as Snehal mentioned, we led the first 3 rounds, basically, of the company. It was the seed in 2020. Then within a year, we did what we ended up calling our Series A, right? It was like a 5 million round, small A/bow seed. And then what we ended up calling our Series B. And then our friends at Kraft led the Series Series C, sorry. And then our friends at NEA led the Series D. And actually, maybe speaking of AI hacking, I think you have a good story about when Kraft was kind of vetting the company, your visit.
So I always find a way in all my VC interactions to one, be memorable in a fun way, but also to kind of understand the conviction of the investor. So I'll actually start with my Signal Fire story. So at the seed round, in my pitch deck, I did one thing that people advise you not to do is send your pitch deck ahead of time as a pre-read. But I actually do that every time. And the reason why is if a potential investor is not going to take the time to read that deck ahead of time, what makes me think they're actually going to put in the time to understand my board meeting or go through the data room pre-board and do their homework and be prepared? One of the things I learned at JSOC and elsewhere was preparedness is key because that allows you to ask the right questions. And so in my seed or pitch deck, 22 slides, slide 22 had an FAQ section with 5 questions. And the middle question was utterly ridiculous. I mean, it didn't make any real sense. There are all sorts of problems in there. So we get on Thanksgiving on the Zoom call, and I think Ilya's in Hawaii on vacation, and Walter's in Aspen skiing. And Walter out of the gate says, hey, before we get into it, slide 22, question 3, you make this claim, and it didn't make any sense to me. Like, can you explain it? I'm like, Walter, it's not supposed to make sense. That's my green M&Ms. If you ever hear like the green M&Ms in contracting and whatnot. And that's where I started to build almost immediate conviction that Signal Fire is going to be the right firm for us because they did their homework, they did their preparation. And you could see in the quality of conversation and dialogue and questions throughout that seed pitch is how much prep the firm had put in order to prepare for this conversation with me as a founder that's passionate about this problem set. And so when I think about different kinds of investors, I look for not only have you been in the arena, but are you putting in the effort to be prepared on that topic to become a high-quality discussion-enabling board member? So the flip of that is for Kraft, for the Series C. So Kraft, David Sachs, if you guys know David, he's the AI czar now for the White House. So David has his mega mansion up on Broadway and invites me to his house. And I'm sitting there in what feels like a hotel lobby. It's a beautiful home, massive view of the Alcatraz, kind of the bay and Alcatraz and the bridge and stuff. And I've got like 10 minutes. He's sweating me out a little bit. So I pull open my phone, turn on my Bluetooth scanner, and I notice that he's got, everyone had these wristbands, these RFID or whatever wristbands, and he had a badge in and out of every room in his house, which I thought was kind of odd. And so what kind of security does he have? And having come from that world, it was kind of fun to kind of go down this path. And so pretty quickly figured out that he had Salto RFID badge readers are effectively in all of his doors. Do a quick scan, find Salto devices listening everywhere, do a little bit deeper interrogation, figure out what version it's at, do a further interrogation, figure out that it's exploitable to a couple of remote code execution problems, and got it to the point where if I'd invoke this one command, I'd have complete code execution and ownership of his entire security system. And I'm walking, David's like, explain to me what you do. I said, David, let me explain. And I walked him through the example of how I'd use an AI agent to hack his house. He's kind of looking at me, he's looking at his wristband, he's looking at me, he's looking at his door. He's like, so you could lock every door and lock us all out? Like, yeah, just like this. Run this command, you can hit enter if you want. And he goes, we don't have keys. Like, the only way his family could traverse the home was to use these RFID wrist bracelets. And his entire family would be completely locked away in each of their rooms, completely stuck. Needless to say, I got the term sheet. But it was hilarious to kind of go through that. And so I think the other part of fundraising in general is to be memorable in kind of a fun way. And that story still stuck. I still bring it up at his investor days, and he always kind of shakes his head. His head of security kind of gets angry at me because he had to do a lot of work to fix that afterwards, which is good.
But actually, so we're on the topic of AI cybersecurity. You should talk about kind of the evolution of when we started. it was hard to get people to buy into this idea that you can replace human labor with AI pen testing, right? Because most pen testing, even today, even though today we run more pen tests, in a month, than all the combined pen testers run in a year probably, right? But back then it was completely sort of unconventional wisdom to say, hey, I can take the work that these pen testing consultants do and build a product that does it. And we got all kinds of objections, all the way from you're just not possible, or the one that was always strange to me, who here is a software engineer by background? Raise your hand. Okay, so we have a fairly good representation. Like in software engineering, you have continuous integration, like you submit your code, tests run, right? I think of this as a little bit like that for cybersecurity, like you're continuously testing your security posture. And some investors are like, why do I need to do this continuously? Just like, I do it once a year now, and it's fine. It seems to work. And to me, that was always such a strange thing, because as an engineer, when I first entered the industry, at Oracle, we had a very large manual QA team. We had people sitting there like clicking screens and filing bugs manually. And when I got to Google just a few years later, Google had very few QA engineers. Everything was automated testing. Like engineers were supposed to write their own automated tests. And that was kind of the philosophy I grew up in as an engineer, that you're responsible for your own quality, for doing your own testing. But it was never, to me, it was so natural to say you should be testing your cybersecurity posture all the time as things change, on every change ideally, right? And a lot of investors just were like, well, if it's good now, why would I test it again? It was so strange. And so there were all kinds of strange objections, to me at least. But it's really evolved now, where it's sort of like almost all the way to the other extreme. Maybe you can talk about your experience talking to investors and how kind of 5 years ago it was hard to get them convinced that this was a thing. Today, you almost have an opposite challenge.
Yeah, and by the way, how much time do we have for this session? Because Ilya and I can go for hours.
You got 30 minutes.
30 minutes
From
left?
now? Sweet.
All right.
You're in for it now.
We'll take a bunch of questions as well. So let's kind of back up for a minute. So my experience with AI was when I was in the Department of Defense, I worked very closely with the Project Maven team. If you guys remember Maven, a lot of stuff in the news. And that was really around full motion video analytics. And the big epiphany I had in 2018, 2019 working with Maven was that the models and weights actually don't matter. So we were working with cutting edge labs around the country for the use of AI in combat. And the models and weights don't matter, it's the training data that matters. And so this is 2019, way before kind of the world realized that. And so I said, an AI company is a data company first. And so the first step is, what data can I collect that creates compounding value over time? Kind of number one. And I always viewed Horizon 3, we're not a pen testing company. Pen testing is just a sensor. Every time we run a pen test or we hack an organization, we're collecting telemetry on actual production configurations that no one else in the world has. In fact, we run more pen tests a day than Big Four consulting firms run a year. And last year, I ran more pen tests than the entire history of computing. Every one of those tests is collecting telemetry or training data that's compounding in value. Because I can use that data to not only improve the core algorithms, but then also move into adjacencies and grab adjacent budgets, whether it's in vulnerability management or automated remediation or whatever else there might be. So the first part was the conviction that this is a data problem, we've got to create compounding value. The second part at the time was, what budget dollars am I targeting? And what stories must I tell to take those dollars? And I especially like budget dollars fulfilled by labor. So in cybersecurity, there's two bastions of labor left. There is pen testing and incident response. And so the question was, could I build an autonomous agent that knows nothing about the environment that could meet the requirements to grab that pool of labor associated with pen testing, compliance budgets, and so on and so forth. And then the third part is, what aha moments do I need in my product to convince a user to be my champion through procurement and actually buy the product? So do I have compounding value? Do I understand the budgets and stories I need to tell? And does the product have a well-defined experience in order to grab hearts, or win hearts and minds and convert into an opportunity? So Ilya and I went through this, and we've stuck through that as conviction. But the investors had very different points of view. Initially it was, this isn't possible. Then it was, the market isn't big enough. And then it was, you need to scale more efficiently, or there's always like some metric you always get dinged on or whatever. And then it was, your TAM's not going to be big enough to IPO. And now it's, oh, you're Gen 2 because you started before OpenAI came out or something to that effect. There's always a reason to get knocked. But the entire investor mindset has completely changed from 2020 to 2025, where it's no longer a question of if this thing is possible or valuable. It's can you actually capture the opportunity and scale efficiently to get after it, which is a good, interesting thing to talk about with AI companies today. But I mean, you heard me rant and rave about valuations and investor mindset and all the other crap along the way.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is now it's kind of flipped to where I would say there is a certain investor mindset that thinks LLMs are the answer to every possible problem. It's kind of like this LLM maximalist mindset. And we kind of ran into that because, for our domain, the way I think about our problem that we're solving is it's really a graph exploration problem. You get on a network and you map out what's on the network, all the different nodes, whether it's a server or a printer or a web camera or whatever it might be. And then we figure out what exploits apply to that node. If we can breach it, that opens up kind of like in Minesweeper, like the next area you can go explore, and you just repeat that. And we run this on very large networks, hundreds of thousands of nodes. I don't know if you can say, what are the most interesting networks that we are paid to hack today?
Yeah.
By the way, this is like the most fun company there is, because you're literally paid to break into people's networks and own them. And maybe, I don't know if you can say, like, some of the people we own.
So I keynoted at Black Hat about 2 weeks ago with the NSA. So the NSA uses us to hack the defense industrial base. And one of the stories on stage was that in less than 5 minutes, there's no humans involved, so it's point-click shoot. Point-click shoot hacked a 1,000-person design company in Virginia, gained access to a share drive with millions of files, and buried within those files were 3D CAD drawings for Nimitz-class aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines that we had complete access to, the latest nuclear submarines. And what's amazing, right, is one, no humans involved. We've basically built a cyber weapon, but we're using that to hack ourselves. The other part is it took less than 5 minutes. In fact, the fastest we've hacked a company is 77 seconds, which means if your SOC can't stop me in 76 seconds, it's game over. Because that's all I got. Because at second 77, I've got keys to the kingdom, I'm locking you out of your systems, I'm stealing all your data, I'm borrowing, you're gonna have to burn everything down and start over. So we have all sorts of fun stories on this idea of we're very quickly breaking in and gaining access to something extremely sensitive. So we had a 9-year-old kid for fun, click go, and the product hacked a large bank in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Full compromise, and that bank had every breach and security tool you could buy. They had the best EDR, the best SIM, the best PAM solution, wherever else was out there. But they couldn't stop us, because these tools weren't tuned correctly, they weren't actually configured right. It also happened really fast, so it's kind of a blitzkrieg approach to attacks. And so what we realized at that time was the future of cyber warfare is AI fighting AI with humans by exception. And we really led that path. We've kind of pioneered executing hacks on production networks at scale. So some of the largest hospitals in the world, largest financial services companies in the world, the long tail of defense industrial base suppliers, they're all part of the corpus of companies that we hack on a daily basis.
What about the one in Vegas?
Can't talk about that one.
Oh, you can't?
Yeah. But we got casinos, we've got large entertainment facilities.
So what's the biggest network? How many IPs on the biggest network we pen test?
So the largest single scope so far is about 250,000 hosts or IPs.
Yeah.
That generated a knowledge graph with about 3 or 4 billion nodes and edges within it. And actually, we can talk about the LLM maximalists, but I gave a talk at Berkeley a couple weeks ago as well on this. Our approach to using LLMs is they're really good at narrow, targeted reasoning problems. So if you ask an LLM a very open-ended question, for the most part, they're terrible. They'll ramble, they'll wander, they'll hallucinate, and so on. But if you give it enough precision in your context and ask it a very narrow problem, they're actually really good. So an example is, I gained access to a file share with 1 million files. If I grab as much context as I can about that file share, the organization it belongs to, the path of that, the kinds of information that led me to compromise that path and so on, and I can give it the file contents, an LLM can reason that says, yeah, this looks like CAD drawings for an aircraft carrier, or this looks like PII information, or this data belongs to accounts receivables. It's really good at classification. But if I give it the 1 million files and say, tell me if this is valuable, it's going to wander and drift and do all sorts of crazy things. So I've got this high conviction that the right way to build an enduring AI company today is using some of the more boring techniques to build context, graph analytics, large knowledge graphs, and so on, but then querying those graphs to build a 200-page prompt that's extremely precise. And using that 200-page prompt against a frontier model, an Anthropic or a Claude or a GPT or whatever else, because the value is going to be in the context, not in the actual response. And if you do it this way, you minimize the number of iterations it takes to answer a question. You get a lot more repeatability. And here's the prompt, what does it say? And here's the same prompt, what's it going to say the second time? And also, if the next version of GPT comes out, I don't have to throw all of my work away. I'm just taking that same prompt and running it against a more updated model. We found that to be 700x to 2000x cheaper in token costs than iterative trial and error, where you're asking an LLM a question, you don't exactly get the right answer, and you keep going back and forth, maybe 50 to 100 iterations in order to get the answer that's actually acceptable. And we found that to be 700x to 2000x more expensive in token costs, which I think is going to become a big problem in AI companies today, where you can't sell a candy bar for $1 if it costs you $3 to make. And I think token costs are not...
Sure you can.
Yeah, sure you can. I don't think token costs are going to come down at the rate people think, because task complexity is increasing at the same time.
Yeah, I think what's happening is I think the frontier models aren't getting cheaper. I think the open source stuff is getting cheaper, but you're also consuming a lot more tokens. So like per token cost may be going down, but you're using a lot more, especially for these reasoning models. So depending on your task, all of these offset, and you're using a lot more. And maybe, I can just kind of maybe briefly touch on kind of our thinking on AI as an investor. Signal Fire, maybe a little bit of background on us. We started, as I mentioned, a dozen years ago, 2013. Our first fund was just over 50 million, 50. We've scaled quickly. Our current fund is about $1 billion. We have about 3 billion AUM. And, our background is really, we're the first venture firm that's built like a tech company. I am the CTO of the firm. We have a data science team, an engineering team. We actually build products for our portfolio to use, and also products for our own investment team to use to help us make the best investment decisions. And so we've been sort of AI native from day one, and investing in the stuff for a dozen years since our inception. And what's been interesting, we've gone through a bunch of hype cycles in that interval. Probably the last AI-related one was self-driving cars. I don't know if you remember in 2017, 2018, there was a lot of interest in self-driving cars, and a lot of startups funded in that space. And I think by and large, they haven't played out. It's been a game kind of that's been won by the giants, Tesla, Waymo, et cetera. We'll see what happens to Zoox, Amazon. And just now it's starting to become real. What is it? Almost 8 years later, something like that. And so, I think, again, as operators, we always look at it through that lens, as because we're practitioners, we're using all these tools. And, for us, it's always interesting, by using this stuff, you can tell the reality from the hype. And I think in many ways it's the only way to tell, because otherwise it's, you're just relying on kind of third-party opinions, and experts may disagree, et cetera. And so what's been interesting about the Gen AI kind of since ChatGPT dropped is, I think the initial reaction of a lot of investors was to go into the picks and shovels layer. I think the thinking was, the analogy was, it's a gold rush. What do you do in a gold rush to get rich? You sell picks and shovels. And picks and shovels ended up being maybe some of the modeling companies, and also the infra that's built just on top. And I think the early application layer companies, if you think back, it seems like an eternity now, but 2.5, 3 years ago, companies like Jasper AI, if anybody remembers it, got off to a hot start, grew very fast, and then sort of fell off a cliff because competition set in, and turned out they didn't have a lot of defensibility. And I think that soured a lot of investors on the application layer, which is kind of where we live. And I think a lot of money has gone into model companies, a lot of money has gone into infra. And my perception was always that that part of the stack, if you look at the foundation model layer, it reminded me a lot of investing in semiconductor companies. Super capital intensive, and you constantly have to invest. When I came of age in computers, I was one of these kids that was always on, getting latest greatest games or whatever. My first PC was a 286, and every couple of years there would be the next generation of Intel processor. Like the 386 was coming out, you'd wait for that because it was going to be like twice as fast and half the price. And then the 486, then the Pentium. It's a little bit like that now, where Intel would invest, I don't know, $5 billion in a new plant in wherever, Arizona, to build the next set of processors. And it would come, and in some ways they're betting the company every time they do one of these generational upgrades. And you kind of see what happened to Intel over the course of that. But it reminds me a little bit of that, where GPT-3 came out, GPT-4 came out, a lot of excitement, great improvement. GPT-5 came out, maybe a little bit disappointing, like judging by kind of like the market reaction to it. But you're having to burn a lot of capital. And as an early stage investor, that was always daunting to us. Now you're in the realm of, even VCs can't fund these companies. You're talking about sovereign wealth funds and countries, and kind of the GPT-6 might take, I don't know, $1 trillion to train. Who knows? Maybe kind of like a Apollo level space program kind of effort to do one of those. And so it's something that wasn't for us. And then the infra layer, what was interesting to me is, as an engineer, it was hard for me to tell when building these applications what had durable value, because you're building on top of shifting sands as these models change super rapidly. If you recall, the early models had very small context windows, right? Like the amount of input, the tokens you could give them as input were tiny, like 8K or something. And there were a bunch of techniques that came out to help you get around that limit, like vector database companies, RAGs, et cetera, and a bunch of them got funded. And, my perception was always, well, that's a temporary state of affairs. The context windows are going to get bigger because the model companies are investing heavily into this. And RAG, it's still here, but the universe of scenarios where it's useful is going to shrink. And so what's going to happen to your TAM, to all these companies? I think by and large, these vector database companies like Pinecone, et cetera, it hasn't been great. They got off to a fast start, but also again plateaued. And so as a result, our perception, even though we're very technical, kind of came up through, I was at Oracle working on databases, at Google on infra. We're infra people, but we always thought the application layers where all the action was going to be ultimately. And the question there is, what's the defensibility? What makes you Jasper versus somebody who has moats in your business? And to us, one of the answers was clearly always, you got to have a data moat. That's one of the areas where you can really build up defensibility, because the special sauce in AI, based on the last 30 years of what I've seen starting at Google and elsewhere, is you can have a very clever model, but if you have better data, you're going to win every day of the week, twice on Sunday. It's the data that makes the model, not the other way around. And so we always look for companies that have access to interesting proprietary data sets that an OpenAI or an Anthropic or a Google can't just pay scale or surge to go have a bunch of people collect the data and incorporate into their models. Horizon 3, as Snehal touched on, perfect example. In some ways, we're getting paid to collect really interesting data on people's networks, their cybersecurity posture, what is on there. You didn't talk about this, but to me, one of the most interesting things is, we get to see what's deployed out in the world. How many customers do we have today?
So 4,200 companies globally.
Okay, so we have over 4,000 customers in all shapes, sizes, all the way, I think we're pretty evenly distributed. Third enterprise, third mid-market, third SMB, and all kinds of verticals. And so, for example, when you look at our healthcare vertical, our hospitals, for example, we notice that they're using a certain kind of gateway, API gateway or something.
Yeah, So the story there is, we looked at all of our healthcare customers. We were able to analyze which software had interesting placement and access in the network. So Mirth Connect is this really obscure healthcare connector software you can go off and buy and connect your hospital system to a healthcare exchange or to a pharmacy exchange or whatever else. And so the first one was, all right, that's interesting piece of software with great placement and access. Only admins are using it, as an example. And then we looked at, well, what is the vulnerability research history of Mirth Connect? And there was almost none. Not because it's really secure software, because nobody bothered to do any sort of zero-day research against it. We're able to take those two pieces of information through a few human calories and machine calories at trying to find 0 days in that code base. And we ended up finding a bunch of 0 days that went basically wildly exploited by bad guys, because we're able to use our data to predict the next piece of software that attackers should be targeting because of the impact they can have against the organization. I can tell you the exact market share of all the top EDR vendors, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, Fortinet, Windows Defender, because I see that. I see their install base across all of my customers. I can tell you which banks are actually secure and which ones are not secure. And there's all sorts of data we can pull. I can tell you exactly what Cisco networking configurations are actually robust at preventing an attack, and which ones don't, because we just attach you. So we use the attacker's perspective to collect a whole bunch of interesting data that no one else in the world has, because we own the entire collection value chain, from stimulating the environment with a nefarious command to seeing how the environment reacts with full instrumentation and storing all of that telemetry to understand what is exactly happening in the environment.
Yeah, like what an interesting and valuable data set. And to me, that's defensibility for the business, because there's no way that an Anthropic or an OpenAI or a Google can ever get that. How would they get that? Right,
that's exactly right. Question?
Are you protecting your data set?
Yeah, everyone asks that very thoughtfully. But we become a target, right? And so we got to do a lot of work. We hack ourselves on a regular basis also. The other part too, though, is that data set not only makes the product get better, but think of it as different people asking different questions of the same data. The data set that I've collected not only helps me in pen testing or hacking, we can use that as a map and compass for where to improve your Splunk configuration, or how to auto-tune your EDR environment, or how to auto-deploy deception into your network. So that allows us to move into all of these adjacent budgets that we can further monetize as we move into a multi-product platform.
And I know there are a lot of founders in the audience, and so when you're pitching investors, certainly when you're pitching SignalFire, that would be an interesting lens for you to kind of think about your business through, because that's how we're going to think about it. If you're an AI application company, what are my data flywheels? What are the data moats that I can build up as customers use my app? Should we move into Q&A now, since you kicked us off? Right there.
To pick up on your comments around the power of...
And maybe you can introduce yourself, just so people know who you are.
Thank you. I'm Jeremiah from Blitzscaling Ventures.
All right.
I want to pick up on your comment on the data moat, on having unique proprietary data. How does that play out when startups can build synthetic data to fill out gaps?
Well, why don't you talk about synthetic data in our context, because we have a lot of experience in that.
So I have synthetic data experience in a couple of different ways. One was during my time at DoD with Maven. So synthetic data, we worked with Microsoft at the time to use video game simulation engines to get synthetic data like navigating Syria or Iraq or whatever town. And the problem is that synthetic data doesn't have high enough resolution for those weights and models to be good at predicting what to go off and do. And at the same time, we couldn't go off and collect all of that data with high resolution either, at least in a lot of these environments. And so the issue with synthetic data in general is you get to an okay state, but the higher value problems require very high resolution data in order to be able to make a decision. And so for us, because we own the entire collection value chain, we get incredibly detailed high resolution data, and I can summarize that data when I need to. But I always have the option to drill really deep to get the resolution necessary to have the right weight model for what to do next. What we found with synthetic data in general was you got to an okay state, and it just wasn't enough to deliver that value in a way that you could have confidence was going to be correct.
But I think it really depends on the domain. I mean, there are certain domains where you can generate high fidelity synthetic data quite easily. If you think about, for example, generating true mathematical statements. That can be done, that can be automated. In certain other domains, it's less easy. And I think where you've seen the most progress in models with reinforcement learning are those domains where it's easier to do this. Code, for example, right? You can create a piece of code, and number one, you can see if it runs, right? Does it compile? Does it run without an error? That gives you a certain sort of verifiability about its validity. You can also write tests for it to sort of say, does it do what I expect it to? We're investors in companies that are helping do this, build RL environments for some of these models. But it really depends on the domain. And I know for a fact that a lot of the research inside Frontier Labs right now is directed at figuring out, can we scale reinforcement learning to other environments, other domains, other than code, math, etc. And it's a bit of an open research problem. I don't think that what Horizon 3 is doing is going to be anywhere close to the top of that list. It's too hard, I think.
Hello, I'm Pavan. I'm an 18-year-old founder. I was wondering, what field do you guys think has the most potential for proprietary data collection?
Okay. Yeah, so let's see. I would start with kind of general, high level, kind of what I would look for is start by looking at data-rich industries, right? What industries kind of by definition are kind of data super valuable? So I would say, for example, if I'm just kind of, we've invested in a bunch of these things, and I can tell you how we thought about it, and so I'll give you examples. Think about the legal industry, right? It runs on documents, right? Basically, it's white-collar knowledge work, right? Everything runs on data in a way. And heretofore, the data has been locked away in SharePoint drives, in PDFs, Word documents, etc. One of the revolutionary new capabilities that LLMs have unlocked is you can really take that unstructured data and with fairly high fidelity extract and structure it. All of a sudden that unlocks all kinds of use cases. We're investors in a company called EvenUp in the legal space that I think is about to announce a new round at $2 billion. We're the largest investor, and we invested early on that premise. It's a very large market where they have some very specific things that make them, I think, unique in their space. There's obviously a lot of competition, but I think they've been able to find a slipstream where they have some defensibility, a lot of defensibility in their business. And I would think over time, I would think about the M word. Can you get a data monopoly in your space? Can you find a data flywheel such that you start with a product, you get some initial set of customers, that usage makes your product better, that allows you to get the next customer, that makes the product better, that allows you to get that next customer, right? And that secret ingredient tends to be more data that your customers are contributing to the product. So I know that was a generic answer, but.
Well, I think Tesla is a good example of this with full self-driving. In fact, when I thought about Horizon 3, I thought about FSD as the model. Why did Tesla install cameras on all these cars early on? Because every car became a sensor, and they got proprietary full motion video data from every car on the road that they could start to build decisions against. And so they've got a data monopoly now. It's the amount of full motion video data they collect on a daily basis exceeds everyone else combined. They are able to train and model against that. And then I think the third part of that is inference to actuator, and actuator in quotes. Because I think that's the next key area. If you have a data monopoly is one thing. Can you create a monopoly around the inference to drive some sort of specific action that no one else can go off and do? And I think actuators are a great proprietary set of actions. So think of the Tesla robots coming out. You're using full motion video to drive actuator behavior in your hands, right, or feet, or in these robots, or getting the car to slam on the brakes and swerve. That's inference to actuator. So I think the next frontier of really interesting high value companies are going to be, not only do they have the data monopoly, which is table stakes, but they're able to drive inference to actuator in a specific domain. And I think you're going to start to see white collar, blue collar start to converge in each of those domains. So I think manufacturing, construction, those areas become super interesting. But the capital requirements look very different. And also the domain experience. Those experts aren't in Silicon Valley. They're in Ohio, in Alabama, in Wisconsin, and elsewhere, because they've got the deep subject matter expertise in the actuator side of the problem, if that makes sense.
Hey, Carl, Fractional Revenue Executive. I was wondering, can you talk to us a little bit about organizational agility to build truly safe organizations from a cybersec perspective? The thesis being bad actors can be mega agile, can be one person wherever in the world. Incentives are high for them to just go and figure something out and iterate until they got it. Organizations can be slow moving, might have incentives that only change once a year, gotta discuss stuff with the board, right? Like you can see how just human governance can slow things down. You're talking about how it's almost AI with human by the side, but how do you think about giving the AI essentially that leeway to make the decision and take the action that it needs to do without creating...
Just buy Horizon 3.
So let me generalize that to something related but a little bit broader. In a world where it's AI fighting AI or humans by exception, the defensive side of the house is way behind in the speed in which to take a decision. And so what does a machine speed defensive architecture look like? I've been kind of wrestling with this for the last couple of months. And I think about both Tesla self-driving and the human body and the way we do reflexes as parallels. So in a Tesla, if my wife's car is about to rear end somebody, it can't go to the Tesla cloud with a bunch of data and get back a decision that says slam on the brakes and swerve. By the time that happens, you've already missed the opportunity and you've already crashed. And so you've got to have a high level of decision-making, authority, and empowerment on the box itself, and it understands how to treat that as a reflex to go off and do something. So I think about the human body, like when my hand's on a stove, I don't go through all 6 layers of the brain to make a decision. My body's going to get to layer 2 and make a decision before they can go. And so what does a reflex-centric defensive architecture look like? And how do you start to empower inference to actuator, if you will, in quotes, but empower decision makers as close to critical services, critical credentials, critical componentry, critical data, and so on, to be empowered to make a decision in the moment without any sort of centralized coordination. So I think it looks like this reflexive architecture where you're empowering decision making at the edge with slower thoughtfulness centrally, but whose job is to transfer learn new decisions out to those edge components where you can. I think that's what the future looks like, if that makes sense. Okay, I think last question.
One? What does one mean?
1 minute. 1 minute.
We're getting the hook.
We're getting the hook. Last question. Was this good use of your time? Kind of got a little bit of... All right. All right, guess we're done. Imagine if we prepped.